welcome to another episode of Halfway Planet. I'm Lawrence.
I'm Tara.
And today we're going to take a bunch of words, I just said bunch, that's what Americans do, and just compare our pronunciations of them. Because when we first got married, I think, in fact, over the years, not just when we first got married, but throughout our entire marriage, there have, of course, been words that we happen upon that we disagree on the pronunciation of. Mm-hmm. And we thought we'd throw some of those words at you, not literally, that could be physically dangerous, and see how it goes. So without further ado, do you want to get underway?
Cheers.
Cheers! Is that one? All right, first word up. It's one of the oldest in the book, isn't it? You say tomato, I say... Well, I've just said how I say it. How do you say it?
Tomato.
Easy as you like. And you're going to find that the next few are food-related, because I think, it's everyday items usually that you discover that you have these pronunciation differences over. And, of course, food is a big part of the everyday. Let's go on to the next one. I mean, this is kind of food, but not really. Which is...
Bottle.
That's not how you say it. That's how that guy from Love Actually who goes to Wisconsin says it. That's also how I say it, coincidentally, bottle. Although if I'm speaking quickly, I might put a glottal stop in there. In other words, bottle.
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 So we have three ways between us.
Do you pronounce bottle differently?
Let us know in the comments below. Do that with all of these words, you little...
Yes, absolutely.
And similarly, inside your bottle, you might have some of this. I would say water. What would you say?
Water.
And of course, again, with this, I might apply a glottal stop and say water if I'm being really casual about things.
And what's really awkward about that is whenever we go to a restaurant, for example, then I always have to say water for him because whoever it is who is waiting on us invariably will not know what he's saying.
That's why I usually order wine.
Next one is basil.
Or basil, if you run a hotel in Torquay. Basil, it was a joke about Faulty Towers. But yes, basil is how I pronounce it. In fact, herbs are quite they have quite a place in this listing, I think you'll find. In fact, we'll get to that word here in just a moment, but we're going to skip around and move on to a French one.
So it depends on where you're from, just like with all of these, as to how you pronounce this. I just say croissant.
Do you know what's weird? Since living in the US, I've also come to say croissant whenever I'm ordering one. I think it's a bit like that whole tomato thing. I just don't want that conversation to happen around my pronunciation. So when I'm ordering something like that, I will say croissant. But back in the day, it was more like croissant. I'd go full French with it. That's
really strange, too, because the English have a very well-known history of butchering French words.
No, you do. You do more than us. We have more of a history, I think, of butchering Spanish words, and you tend to get that right. Okay, on to the next one. We have this quite often for breakfast, or we have done recently to try to get healthy. It's not worked in my case. How do you pronounce it?
Yogurt.
And I say yogurt, and this isn't one of those where I've taken on the American pronunciation. Could be because I don't really ever order it in a sort of restaurant or anywhere like that, so I've had no reason to try to adapt, I suppose. So I still say yogurt to this very day. All right, next one. This is one that is quite interesting, and in fact, this feeds back into that Spanish conversation I was having just a moment ago. How the American pronunciation here is more close, I suppose, to the original Spanish. How would you say it?
Oregano. Yeah,
and we would go with oregano. We think that A there really needs that extension to it. But no, I looked into this, and typically Spanish speakers will say it more or less how you say it.
Well, sure. There's no accent mark.
Right. We don't know that in England. We're just not as exposed, not in that way, to sort of Spanish speakers. Yeah, we go on holiday to Spain, but we always keep our English there and drink lots of beer, cerveza. And we spoke about it earlier on. It is the word herb. Herb. Now, again, I've talked about this in previous Distant Words videos. The dropping of the H is something that we also did in England centuries ago, but when that became socially unacceptable in the higher echelons of society, we stopped doing it. And then thereafter criticised Americans for doing it. Very silly. Yes, I know. We have a well-known history of doing such things. On to the next. Actually, this is not a food item, officially. Squirrel.
Squirrel?
Yeah, it's a very subtle difference, but somebody pointed out to me that Americans more or less say squirrel in one syllable. Say it again.
Squirrel.
It's almost like squirrel. But you don't quite do it. You do put two syllables in there almost.
Squirrel.
Go on, do it again.
Squirrel.
Say it like me.
Squirrel.
I don't speak like that. What is that? That's amazing.
Squirrel.
Squirrel. I just did it like you.
And I just did it like you.
Back to an actual food. I don't know how squirrel got into the food section. Sorry about that. It reminds me of a trip to Asda. No, if anyone from Asda's watching this, that was merely a dream I had. A nightmare, in fact. This one, though, bananas, again, part of our breakfast regime. Is regime the right word? Yay! How would you say banana?
Banana.
Banana. Again, it's not the extension of that A. I think that's one of the things that really sets Brits and Americans apart when it comes to pronunciation is our treatment of vowel sounds, but specifically A vowel sounds, and we've seen a lot of evidence of it in this very list, and we're going to see more evidence of it in our next entry, pasta.
Pasta.
Yeah, so a different treatment there of that A sound.
Pasta.
Or what if I were to do it? You know, putting in how do you say math?
Math.
Yeah, so you don't say moth.
Neither do you.
No, I
Moth.
don't. Yeah. So it's interesting again how we kind of do that.
I'm good at my moths.
My mathematics. Nobody would ever do that, just to be clear. Even in England. This one's an interesting one. Back to sort of French origin words. I worked in a restaurant once for about 3 weeks before I got fired because I was terrible. But one of the words that came up was this word cordon bleu. And I've always pronounced it that. The people I worked with pronounced it that way. And then I met this one.
Cordon bleu.
Cordon bleu. Look at it. It doesn't say blue, like the colour, like our logo.
Well, it's based on French food.
Yeah, I know. So then it's based on the French pronunciation. Bleu.
I could say that if I were in France.
You could, and probably
Cordon
should, because if you don't, they'll kill you or kick you out. Or poison you while serving you cordon bleu.
Or probably just speak English because they pity me.
Possibly that. I mean, I would too at that point. Here's an interesting one. This is a word we've covered many a time. And how do you say it, firstly?
Schedule.
And this is how I say it. Schedule. Because, you know, in England, not everybody says schedule. I don't think I ever have. You ask any Englishman or any Brit, for example, how they pronounce it, and you'll probably get about a 50-50 answer. It's not really that uniform. But I don't meet many Americans, I should say, that say schedule. I'd have to do some research into it. You all know that I love to do that. I might whip out some maps.
If you know, let us know in the comments below.
Yeah, it'd be weird if you did know, but again, we're always open to that. And now onto a much smaller word, but for all its sort of briefness in terms of letters, it does cause quite a big difference. Usually, anyway, or sometimes, not always. There are some cases where there's agreement, but I think between you and I say palm, and you say
Palm.
So you actually put the L in there.
Which is weird, because we don't do that with all of those words.
No, you do not. We're going to come on to that here in just a second. That was a weird one for me, but sometimes I do find myself putting that L in there, and I think it's your influence. But having said that, you don't put that L in there with this word, do you?
Half.
But you do pronounce the A differently. Again, it's another example of that A getting this special treatment.
Half.
Half. Yeah, that would be a weird one. I, for the record, say half. I don't know that there's any other way in England to pronounce it, or in the UK. Half. I'm trying to think in the South. Half. Yeah, it is. I think it's the same across the board in the UK.
What about calf?
Calf. Okay, and now onto some names, and in a moment some place names. But firstly, we get caught up, I think, Britain and America, between our pronunciations of this very famous Dutch artist. I would pronounce it. Well, let me clarify. British people typically would pronounce it Van Gogh. You may have seen Matt Smith's pronunciation of it in Doctor Who, for example. I used to pronounce it that way, but I subsequently learned the Dutch way of pronouncing it, and then subsequently butchered the Dutch way of pronouncing it. But I tend to go for Van Gogh, like that, so it's a very guttural, throaty sound. How do you do it?
Van Gogh.
Do you keep it simple? Neither the Brits nor the Americans tend to get it right. Ask any Dutch person. Also ask them how badly I butchered the Dutch pronunciation there. I Dutchered it. Can you give me one for that? On to the next one. Speaking of countries, we're going to go south of the Netherlands now to North Africa. Tunisia.
Tunisia.
Oh, look at that. We've got two differences there.
Or Tunisia.
Yeah.
Depends on how quickly I'm saying it, I think.
You very much go for the sound, and I don't.
I've noticed in working with British children that that's a pretty normal thing, especially when we're talking about kindergartners and they're just learning their word differences. When they're writing them down, they will actually write T for CH and CH for T because they get the sounds legitimately confused with each other at the beginning of words.
So like Tuesday.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Just like that.
Nice. Well, we've got another example of that coming up later on. Stay tuned. Another place name. For me, this one is simply pronounced Madagascar. Where do you go with it?
Madagascar.
Madagascar. So that last part rhymes with NASCAR.
Nazca.
Nazca is not a, as far as I know, there's no racing entity known as Nazca. Speaking of words that begin with N and are based in the United States, Nevada. I get killed all the time, not literally, because that would be repetitive death syndrome. Don't think that's a thing. Nevada, I get, attacked, or not even attacked. I get rightfully and justifiably criticized by people from that very state for my pronunciation of it. And it's so hard for me to change it because it's just not natural, I think, for British people to pronounce that second syllable the way that is done here in the US. But you pronounce it
Nevada,
which I think is how people in Nevada would say it. Okay, I threw this one in just to be mean to you. This is a place in, I think, Somerset in southwest England. How would you pronounce that?
Hunknall.
No. I hope there's somebody from this village watching. It's actually pronounced Punnell. You don't need most of the letters in that, do you?
I mean, I'm not surprised.
Hopefully somebody is watching from that very village.
Hello, Punlians.
Punlians? I don't know if that's the demonym. All right, on to brand names briefly. It was quite shocking to me. Not shocking. I mean, I didn't lose sleep over this, but I used to own, products anyway. A football. Let's say I owned a football by this very company that I've forever pronounced Adidas. You don't do that, do you rebel?
We pronounce it Adidas
It's
and
not just you.
Adidas.
Adidas.
It sounds like you're a little child trying to pronounce a word for the first time.
Or it just sounds like the capital of Ethiopia.
Ooh.
It's Addis Ababa. Again, on similar lines.
Nike.
Nike. And I think, doesn't it usually have an accent over the E?
No.
Just making that up. I've always pronounced it like the name Mike, just with an N. Nike. Nike shoes.
Are you the
Football.
only person who does that?
No, it's a very British thing to do.
How strange.
Yeah. By the way, this is not we're not sponsored by Adidas and Nike. We're throwing these in there because they are quite valid, I think, and come into people's everyday life, if indeed they are sporty like us. On to the next one. We're better at this one, actually, I think, or at least you are. It's me, at least in the videos, is talk.
Talk.
Now, you don't talk, do you? You don't put an L in this.
Talk.
She's mimicking me again. She does that all the time.
I want to talk.
That was an ad in the UK when we lived there. How do you pronounce, as an American, the word talk?
Talk, because the L apparently is silent.
Yeah.
Again, we're all over the place with the L's.
And the A's, again. Not just American English, though. British English, just English in general, has weird treatment of A's. Okay, we're not quite done yet, but if you're enjoying this video, why not share it on social media, including those of you that are on this, Twitter. Twitter! So that's, again, where you put the D's in there. You substitute the T's for the D's, just like with City. I just thought that it was a cheap plug for our Twitter accounts. And finally, we thought we'd finish off with one that's quite important, I think, to not only myself and Tara, but to you fine folks watching, and that is YouTube.
YouTube.
Stop it! You've got to do yours!
YouTube. So subscribe below.
Yes, subscribe below.
Subscribe below.
Stop it! She's evil, isn't she?
Get your subs in.
Get your subs in? What is that? You plonker.
Plonker.
Thank you again for watching Halfway Planet, and let us know in the comments below if there were words that we missed from our list. I'm sure there were plenty. If you would like to help support this channel, the best way to do that is by going to patreon.com/lostinthepond, just like these fine folks to the right. Every penny helps and really makes the channel what it is. So thank you once again for your support if you are featured here to the right, and for those of you that support us in the future. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to see more like this, you can do so by clicking on this video up here to the left. And at this point, I think it goes without saying, but if you'd like to see more of these videos and you haven't yet had the chance to do so, you can subscribe to my channel by hitting my stupid little face and clicking my bell.